Well, welcome everyone this afternoon to a webinar to share some information about something we're really excited about here at My Future NC, as well as with our state partners, one of which is the Department of Public Instruction. And we just appreciate you all being here and would love if you would quickly just drop in the chat where you're from so we get a sense of what kind of representation we have from across the state, and just keep adding that information. And in the meantime, I will let Amy do a quick introduction and welcome. Amy, are you with us? All right, well, I think maybe Amy is having some technical difficulties, so we will move on. But Amy is with the Department of Public Instruction, and I think she was just going to share a couple of words about My Future NC, which I will go ahead and do in her stead. My Future is a relatively new nonprofit in the state focused on and supporting the state's approved education attainment goal. Oh, are you there, Amy? Do you want to go ahead and jump in? All right, I'll continue. We're focused on reaching the state's attainment goal, which is 2 million by 2030. So having 2 million North Carolinians hold a high quality credential or degree by the year 2030. Melanie Stowe and David Smith are both with us from My Future NC as well. And Melanie's going to share a little bit more about that goal and sort of the work that lies ahead in terms of helping North Carolinians reach their potential and earn those credentials that we know will put them on the path to a family-sustaining career. And we think NC Workforce Credentials, which I'm going to share a little bit about here, is an important part of reaching that goal. So just quickly, here's kind of the agenda of how we plan to spend our time over the next hour. And again, we know you have many places you could be, many things that you could be doing. So we really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. So first, I will share a little bit of information about what NC Workforce Credentials are and why they're important, and a little bit kind of behind the curtain in terms of how we as a state have been identifying these credentials. Then I will pass it over to Nancy Cross, who's with the reporting and analysis team at DPI. She's going to share some information kind of putting NC Workforce Credentials within the context of CTE and statewide secondary education. Then we will pass it to Melanie Stowe, who's the communications director at My Future NC. And I really think this is going to be kind of the heart of our conversation and presentation today, to share some assets and tools that she's been working on to enable you to start talking about these credentials with students and families. We're really at the very beginning of creating those assets, so we'll also be asking for your input and suggestions in what you think would be helpful tools to start talking about what these credentials are and how to communicate about them with students. We will then have some time at the end for questions and answers. I do encourage you, if you have questions as we go along, drop them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. We probably, because we have a lot to get through, we probably won't stop and answer the questions in real time, but we'll be monitoring that and certainly addressing them afterwards. And if there's anything that we can't get to, we'll have our emails at the end and encourage you to reach out and get in touch with us. Finally, just to show My Future NC's appreciation for you all being here, we will announce a door prize winner at the end. So look forward to that as well. All right, so I'm going to dive right in here and just share some data that you may, I'm guessing, probably haven't seen before, that really illustrates why these non-degree credentials are important to students and to employers in terms of their talent needs. This is research, this is data that comes from our North Carolina Department of Commerce, and it shows that these non-degree awards are associated with some of the fastest growing jobs in North Carolina. So as you can see from this graphic, yes, degrees matter as well. And so we don't certainly want to discount folks pursuing a post-secondary degree, but we also know that some of the fastest growing jobs in the state are looking for these more skilled-based credentials and to meet their talent need. And so that's really sort of the big picture in terms of why this is important. But what we also know is that it's a very complicated, I'm going to go back actually real quick here and just say, yeah, we also know that it's a very complicated landscape. If there's a group out of Washington, D.C. that has identified literally hundreds of thousands of these non-degree credentials, which is just a very confusing picture for students, for families, even for employers. And I'm sure sitting in your seats as career development coordinators and counselors in terms of what are the credentials that really make sense and in terms of leading to opportunity for students. And so that's really been the impetus of this work. It started at near the beginning of the pandemic as a cross-sector engagement. And here are some of the partners that you can see that have been involved in this work to date. What I will share is that this is it. Again, it's a cross-sector collaborative. So My Future NC is providing facilitative leadership to this work, but it's also really sort of co-led by DPI, by North Carolina Community Colleges, and by the North Carolina Department of Commerce, including the workforce system, which serves a lot of our adult learners in the state. And then I will just say that, as a cross-sector collaborative, we also wanted to make sure that this work wasn't just living in Raleigh. And so in the fall of 2021, the co-leads signed a memorandum of understanding to establish a 21-person advisory board or advisory council for this work that comprises employers as well as education and training partners from around the state to help guide and steer this work. That council meets quarterly. It reviews the recommendations around credentials to add to our list of overall credentials, which I'll talk about, and also to provide guidance and input on policy recommendations and other initiatives to support this work. So again, at a very high level, NC Workforce Credentials really has 4 strands of work. The first 2, again, are around this making sense out of the very complicated ecosystem of credentials and identifying those that are industry valued and lead to put a student on a pathway to a family sustaining wage career. We have spent most of our time in this work so far creating a methodology and a process for doing that. We really are looking at the credentials, the jobs that are associated with these credentials, getting information from our Department of Commerce about the wages for those jobs as well as demand. And then the qualitative component, which is having conversations with employers to ask them if they use those credentials as a hiring preference. So again, it's kind of got the data side of it, the hard data, and then the more kind of endorsement piece of information that we're asking from employers. We've done that through focus groups, through interviews, through talking with industry associations, and then also folks who have submitted applications to be considered have shared letters from employers that they partner with. The third strand of this work is really around how, there's all this work of identifying these credentials, but what we really want to do is align toward them as a state. And that means incentivizing individuals to earn those credentials because we know that that's what employers are looking for based on the process that we've set up. And so there's already been some funding available at the state level to support community college students in particular, because I know when you're in a high school environment, if you're pursuing one of these credentials, there's funding available from the state. There's been some financial assistance available to community college students earning these credentials. And in fact, one of my future's legislative priorities this year is to make that a recurring funding stream so that students who are earning these credentials who don't have access to the financial resources to pay for the preparatory courses to earn them will have an avenue or a pathway to get that covered. And then the last strand of this work is really around data. I'm not going to spend much time here, but just to say, as a state, we need to build up our capacity to track everyone who earns these credentials. There are mechanisms to do that for students who are in high school, but we don't have those mechanisms across our education sectors. So just to go a little bit deeper into kind of how we've been doing this, as I said, we've been engaging directly with employers and started vetting some sectors back in 2020 and 2021. You can see those listed here, and then finished up with additional sectors last year. We also had an open application cycle last year because we know that we weren't going to find everything through these conversations sector by sector. And so we had an open application where we had partners from around the state. CTE district directors are one of the eligible partners who could submit a submission for one of these credentials so that they could have that opportunity. If we will have another cycle that will open in the spring, I'm expecting it will be late March. It feels like spring or summer today already, doesn't it? But it's technically still winter, I think. So we'll be opening that and encouraging folks to continue to let us know of credentials that you think really fit the criteria to be an NC workforce credential. And then the other thing I'll just emphasize here is this is not a one and done kind of process. It's not like we know that we've spent this time identifying these initial sets of credentials by sector, and then we think that it's going to be like that forever. We know that skills needs change, credentials change, employers are looking for different things. For example, right now there's a lot of work in clean energy and clean tech and some new credentials being developed in that space. So we will be continuing to sort of reevaluate all of these credentials on a regular basis to find out if they're really continuing to hold their currency and that industry continues to really value them, because we want this to be a living set of credentials, not something that's just stagnant. So I'm just going to go a little bit deeper here before I hand it over to Nancy to kind of talk about NC workforce credentials in the DPI context. And I'm hoping that this slide provides a little bit more kind of concrete examples of what we're talking about here. And just to say that really this, because we do have these 4 categories of credentials, foundational credentials are those that tend to be pretty broad-based and kind of baseline skill sets. It's not really the focus of this work. Where we are squarely focused on identifying and really supporting these credentials are in the essential and the career categories. They are associated with pathways that lead to higher wage careers, and in some cases stackable credentials, and they tend to be the ones that really do directly lead and give you that hiring preference, or in some cases it's even a license, in order to obtain an entry-level position. So you can see some examples on this slide of what those look like. The last category are advanced credentials, which again are not really the focus of this work. Those tend to be credentials that are kind of add-on or bolt-on credentials for folks who already have a strong foothold in their career, and they're looking for additional credentials to advance their career. I think the IT space is a good example where you can get some very high level and additional sort of credentials in that space. But again, we're really focused on those essential and career credentials that provide opportunity and that industry tells us they're looking for in terms of meeting their talent pipeline. And Melanie's going to share a little bit later some links to the website where you can see all of the credentials that have been identified so far. Spoiler alert, it's about 150, so there's a lot out there, and certainly encourage you to kind of take a look and spend some time with that. But in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy to kind of talk about some analysis and some work that she's done. Actually, before I turn it over to you, Nancy, there was one more quick thing I wanted to mention, just because I think we may have some folks who work in CTE in districts who are also part of this call. And just to acknowledge that we know through your, and I'm going to get a little technical here, but through your Perkins funding and policies, you are also submitting credentials to DPI, and we're very aligned with that. And we're having conversations with DPI about how some of those that are submitted through that process for Perkins reporting and for the work that Nancy does could also be forwarded to NC Workforce credentials to be considered to be added to the list. So I just wanted to mention that in case that's relevant to anyone who's on today's call. So with that, Nancy, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cynthia. And I just want to say how much we on the education side of the house appreciate our partnership with My Future NC and all of our external partners. And so it's great to see counselors and CDCs and CTE directors all here. And we just appreciate your interest in credentialing and the important work that's happening across the state. So I'm dropping in the chat a link to our 2021-2022 credential report. Each year in CTE, we collect and report on our individual and combined credentials that are earned across the state. And so I wanted you to have access. That's almost a 300-page document. So it gives you credentialing data to the PSU level, which is our public school unit. So our down to the school system level. So it's filled with lots of good research that helps us understand why we're credentialing students in high school. And on the next slide, I'm sharing a statistic there that brings that work together in terms of the importance of it. We know that in 2022, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 45.2% of civilian workers were required to have a credential. Certainly our goal is that all of our students eventually become employed, gainfully employed workers, and we know that a good number of them, approaching 1/2 of them, are going to need a non-degree credential for the jobs that they're going to do. So in terms of contributing to helping our students meet that goal, in 2022, 37% of our graduates who were CTE concentrators, which meant they had completed a particular pathway of study leading to a career opportunity, earned an industry recognized credential in their pathway of concentration. More students earn credentials in CTE than that, but we're specific with this, this metric that we make sure that the credential is aligned to their specific pathway of concentration. Okay, Cynthia, on the next slide. So in our work with credentials, we are certainly interested in being as diligent as My Future NC and Cynthia described how that vetting process works, because there are literally tens of thousands of available credentials, but we want those to be aligned, just as Cynthia said, to job opportunities, increased employability, increased wages, all those important pieces that will contribute to our students' success. And so part of our work is to connect to the North Carolina workforce credentials. And we're excited to share that in the 21-22 school year, our students earned almost 51,000 industry recognized credentials that are aligned to the North Carolina workforce credentials list. We offer about 70 of the, and I heard you say 150, I have approximately 160 here, but we offer about 70 of those credentials, so almost half of them. 64 of those had reported credentials in the last school year. And just to put it in context with our overall credentialing efforts, we had over 113,000 combined credentials earned in our state, and almost 40% of those are aligned to the North Carolina Workforce Credentials list. So we're very excited that our credentialing efforts reflect the work of My Future NC and help those students get a head start on earning those credentials. I will just give one point of explanation, and this is laid out even in more depth in the credential report that I shared with you. We have credentials that are individual, like for instance, in Carpentry 1, there are multiple individual credentials, but those then get lumped together. And if students earn all the credentials offered in the particular course, then they earn what is called a combined credential. And while there might be 8 individual credentials, that represents only 1 combined credential. And then one next slide that shows the connection between where the credentials are being earned and what the comparison is between the workforce leveling of essential and career and North Carolina CTE's tiering system. We typically assign a tier of 1, 2, or 3 to credentials, and you can see there that there are some essentials that are 2 and some that are 3, some career that are 3. So they're not perfectly aligned because our metrics are a little bit different in terms of how we assign that leveling, but there's a great deal of overlap and essentially a good alignment there. You see the credential name, how many were earned in our state. And then because the credential attainment report is also a tool for our CTE leaders across the state, we provide a list of which PSUs have the highest attainment for a particular credential, so directors can network and reach out to folks who are having a great deal of success with a particular credential. And then lastly, I just wanted to share our overall individual credential attainment and let you see how we've had a few spikes. We certainly had our COVID dip like almost everywhere in the world had, but the greatest impact for this year, the 2 things. One, and Cynthia mentioned funding, our legislators have now funded us almost 100% of our credentialing allotment need for the state. So over 98% of the need is provided through $15.8 million in recurring funding. So our districts don't have to look for grants or other funding sources. And so last year, there were 239,200 individual credentials earned in CTE across the state. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it to Melanie.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everyone, as Cynthia mentioned, for being here because we know you've had a long day, and there's another day tomorrow. Do want to just make sure that everyone's aware, My Future NC, we are a nonprofit and we are tasked with monitoring and reporting on the state's educational attainment goal, of which you all are an extremely important key and part of this goal. And that is that by 2030, 2 million North Carolinians aged 25 to 44 will hold either an industry valued credential or post-secondary degree. And so we know that the work that you're doing in public instruction is key to that. And many of the measures that we report on and we celebrate are because of you. However, we as a state are currently 31,000 individuals behind where we need to be. And so credentials are one solution to this. And our role is really to connect, convene, communicate, collaborate, and commit to you that whatever you need to use this resource with your students and to make what you're doing even more relevant and easy for you, that's what we're here to talk about today. So the next slide, toolkit, we have developed and are refining a toolkit. And so this will be a one-stop shop where you could go and access the information for credentials, success stories, a one-pager. And quite frankly, I could probably put 3 or 4 more bullet points. And that's what I'm here to hear from you via the chat, or certainly you could communicate with me afterwards, but just to let us know what it is that you need from us to make this easy. because you have access as career development coordinators, high school counselors, folks that work in CTE, you have access to students and have access to providing them opportunities, not just to earn a diploma on time, but to also leave school with credentials, and to leave where they are in a position to achieve great things. And that truly is our goal. It's not just having the credential, the diploma, the degree, it's that they are able to enjoy what they do as a career, and that they enjoy life, and that they contribute because they are right where they need to be. And so that's another piece of which Nancy just talked about that's so important, because there are so many credentials that are attached to things that students are very interested in and very bright. And so we want to promote those. On the next slide, there's an overview of the website, and I will put this in the chat, just a link to the site. This, of course, is where a lot, if not all of the information can be found regarding credentials. And I will make note that while we're talking to you about high schoolers earning credentials, anyone of any age, an adult, can earn a credential. So there are some links here that will be specific to adults, but we again want to talk to you about students while you have a captive audience, and that they leave school not only with, again, the diploma, but credentials under their belt. And the next slide, there is a credential list. And this is where you actually, each of the credentials, that the 150 to 160, and it continues to grow. These are directly tied to the North Carolina career clusters and the pathways. So this is common language that we're used to. And if you look at this site, this particular site, and if you select any of those 16 career pathways, it will drop down and show you all of the credentials that Cynthia mentioned have been vetted and approved, and will note if they're career, foundational, or essential. And this is really important because there are literally tens of thousands of credentials, but we don't want you or any student or any learner of any age wasting time on a piece of paper and a certificate that does not connect to a job, to better employment, to a better opportunity, and certainly where they are earning a family sustaining wage. And the other piece too that's important with the credentials is certainly we educate students so that they can be anywhere they want, but we want them to stay right here in North Carolina. We don't want them to leave their zip code. And so that's the other piece that's key to this, is that we have business and industry partners, of course, NC Commerce throughout the state, and we are promoting jobs in North Carolina for North Carolina students and North Carolina graduates. So next slide. Part of the excitement is that there are success stories. We know credentials matter. These are 3 of many. And we are talking to students. This is tier 1. So yes, these are adults. They're young adults. But we will also be talking to high school students who have graduated or are going to graduate and already have credentials under their belt. And so for the success stories, this really is a quick snapshot tied to one of the career clusters or career pathways where this individual is employed, and then their success, the success story. And these are just excellent. And it's not always about the money, although all of them earn more. It's about being able to pick the job they want, being qualified for the job they've always wanted. And several of them just say, just a better quality of life. I just feel good because I'm going in, working to my full potential, and I'm valued for that. And the credential is what mattered in these instances. So on the next slide, we'll just, so you can see one up close. This is a template. And as I mentioned, we have lots of stories like this. But before we put all these in templates for you to print, to share, we want to make sure that these are the things that matter to you and your students. without having to read pages and pages. So it's real simple. It's their name, their occupation, the prosperity zone. And we debated, do we put the high school, do we put the community college? And we really decided, let's put the prosperity zone, because we don't want someone to think, oh, well, that's because they live there. So we really wanted to be more regionally focused, but we welcome your input. Again, we attach it to the career pathway cluster, the credentials that they earned, and then their success story in their words. And the folks that have earned credentials are so just authentic and honest about the difference it made and telling where they did work and where they now work. I'm going to pause here, and I think it's on the next slide, but if you have any thoughts, and I said you could unmute, I think you're all muted, but if you chat, unmute me, I'll go rogue and I will unmute you, and you can say whatever you'd like. But if you have any additional thoughts as to what high school students would want to see on this one pager, so this isn't data, this isn't a statistic, this is a real person who earned a credential and is better for it, and it's in their own words. Is there anything else that you could think of that may be of interest that we might want to consider adding, that would make it better for your students, that would make it better for you? You're the one that get the questions every day. Why does this matter? Why should we do this? So anything that you could think of, we welcome if you would put that in the chat or share those ideas with us. So we've got questions. Yes. How much more money? I will say, I know you can't read the fine print, but in each success story, it is either noted the percent of increase that they were able to earn, and it ranges from 300% more to twice as much, or we actually do include the amount if the individual shares that with us. So salary is always mentioned, whether it's the exact amount or a percentage increase. Everyone's been very open about that. All right, salary, money, just looking. And the other exciting piece, just to note, and by the way, we look forward to your high school students being one of our success stories too, and they don't need to wait until they're 25. Like I said, our next tier are high school students that are earning credentials and coming out of high school with credentials under their belt. But the exciting part here is that I know sometimes it's taboo for folks to share salary. All of these success stories, they want people to know, hey, I went about it the long route. I had no idea that a credential would do this for me, and that I could earn this in a short amount of time and immediately change my life for the better. And again, not just about money, but just the ability to do and enjoy the career that they've chosen.
And Melanie, can I add just one additional thought along those lines, which I think is particularly, and I meant to mention it a little bit earlier, which is that we also kind of want to emphasize that for high school students, this isn't about career or college in terms of their pathway, that students in high school have opportunities to earn these credentials as a way to have a better job while they're in college, for example, to explore their interests and see if it really is the career for them. And that, and really, frankly, sometimes to boost their college application or their resume or whatever opportunity, right? To show, as a 17-year-old, I took advantage of this opportunity in my high school, and it's a really good signaling both to colleges as well as employers. So there really is, I think, a lot of opportunity around messaging. That this isn't just for people who, are on one pathway and aren't headed to college. These credentials can be important to any student while they're in high school as well. And those are the kinds of stories I think we would love to collect as well. So Sorry for that. I just
No,
wanted to
that-
add that context.
Well, that's a great example. And Jordan, who's on our screen right now, is a perfect example of that. He was a manager at a car wash and didn't enjoy that and went to Cleveland Community College, earned his basic law enforcement training certification, immediately was employed, immediately doubled his salary. And then from there, he decided to go ahead and get his 2-year and then 4-year degree. And now he's a sergeant and an adjunct professor at Cleveland Community College. And so, true story, it all connects. And the credential, he said, was the step in the right direction, the step that motivated him to pursue more education. Thank you, Cynthia. All right, we also, as part of the toolkit, we have a one-pager. There we go. We have a one-pager that really highlights the information Cynthia shared earlier. And it also includes a link to our website and also an email address for questions. It includes the 4 credential categories and a link to the credential list. So this is just a one-page document, PDF, electronic with hyperlinks. And if not, the link is spelled out if it's printed. This is a quick overview. There's a website, and I know that this is something you can dig into. We always welcome feedback with regards to the site. We have success stories that are bountiful, plentiful. They're all coming. And yes, we will be literally, this toolkit, again, will be housed online. We'll continuously update these. There are more success stories than minutes of the day to secure that that information. And the second tier, which we will be working on the end of this month and 1st of March, will include high school students. We already have the stories from them, but before we moved any quicker or further, we just wanted to ensure that we're putting the right things on the template because these folks are working and they're enjoying their jobs and life, and we don't want to have to come back and ask them 10 more questions. So we just want to get it right the first time. So that said, is there anything that you could think of, anything that you would need that would be helpful to promote the credentials? All right, I'm looking at questions. Okay, so Cynthia, this is a question specifically regarding students that might need extra effort, financial concerns, and that might, I don't know if that'd be someone with DPI either, that with regards to the costs that are attached to credentials.
Yeah, I was reading the one about special populations. Thank you, Deborah, for that. One of the things that's on our to-do list is the website that Melanie showed you, where you can see the drop down and see all of the credentials. We plan to embed those credentials into NC Careers, which is the larger career exploration tool for the state that I hope you all are familiar with, so that everyone can see more information about the job that these credentials are related to, but then also the credential itself. It's a big lift, I'll just say that, because these credentials can change. And so we have to make sure as we do that, as we're providing information about what it takes to earn the credential, which I think is what you're asking, that we have mechanisms to make sure that stays up to date. And then we also want to get to the point where we can share who's offering those credentials as well. So that's the vision, and I appreciate that feedback, because I do think that having more information will be helpful to students of all ages.
We have on, and feel free to continue the chat, on the next slide, we have our contact information. If you think of anything that would be of help to your students, because you have daily access to our greatest resource. So we need you. Please let us know. My email's there. Please reach out to me. We want to make sure that you have whatever it is. If it's a poster, landscape size, 16 by 20, I mean, whatever it is, think it up. We want to make sure you have that. If it's more opportunities with a webinar with students, anything, think big, think small, think whatever it is that you need to make this easier, because we are not trying to add one more thing. We just want students to have access to this information and to be aware of the opportunities. Because it's certainly, I think in the stories with the success stories, particularly of our adult learners, I wish I had known about this sooner. Because as life goes on, sometimes it becomes harder to pursue these opportunities. And so this is just a prime opportunity for our high school students, again, to leave with many doors open. And as Cynthia said, to be able to pursue college, career, credentials, all the things.
So do we have any other questions that anyone wants to drop in the chat, going back to the information that I shared, the information that Nancy shared? And thank you, Melanie, for your willingness to entertain all communication and messaging ideas from across the state. I think that's really great. And I know that David from My Future is going to be sending out a follow-up email that will also include our contact information and links to all of the resources that were shared here. So Tamara asked, where do we find the toolkit on the website? Melanie, can you answer where they can get it right now? Is it?
So we're going to share that link. We have your email addresses from registering. We're going to share that with you. We wanted to make sure if there was anything that came up today that we were able to add and update accordingly, and we will share that with you. And that will include also the contact names and all correct emails.